Namaskar and welcome to Understanding Consciousness podcast, episode number 21. And based on yesterday's discussion on free energy and active inference, I decided to just pursue this understanding better and see what I can get from the Journal of Neuroscience of Consciousness. And I found an interesting paper written by none other than Carl J. Friston as one of the authors out of four, who is one of the pioneers of the active inference theory, active inference model of the mind. And the paper is called Perceptual Awareness and Active Inference. Do not fear those who find these terms as difficult and can't understand what they are talking about. Neither can I a lot of the times. The thing that I've realized is that these papers are not as tough as they seem in the first viewing, because there is a lot of repetition in the way they explain, which is very nice for people like us who are just laymen, just jumping into a random place in this whole story of finding out the truth. And this paper is very interesting. Based on the introduction and the abstract, I really like it, and the way it is trying to explain. Now, this is what it is. This is what the story is of the paper. There is a model of the world, a model of the brain. I think as a scientist, when a baby is born and a brain comes into the world and has all sorts of perceptory sensory inputs from the world, from that moment on, the brain tries to make sense of the world by making a hypothesis and then testing that hypothesis, just like a scientist, and then trying to minimize the error between what it thought, what it predicted, and what actually happened, and then updates the model, updates the understanding based on those findings, right? As a scientist, everything is as a scientist like, which is very fascinating. The fact that scientists are also made of the brain. The brain is itself a scientist. And I'm not talking about things that we perceive, just imperceptible things like learning how to walk, visual system, learning that the place where there is a boundary between colors is most definitely a place, most definitely shows a change in the object in the real world. The edges and the understanding how shadows work, right? The shadows work, and the color in the shadows, how does that work, and all those interesting things. They are all made of they are all learned because of this process of making a model, testing because of perception. That's what people thought, that just perception is the only thing that tests the hypotheses, what you perceive, or the data that is coming in. And this goes really well with a lot of different phenomenon, a lot of different ways in which the brain learns, the learning ability of the brain, and it really helps in understanding different types of phenomenon. I've already said that. However, some phenomena are at odds with the way this happens. A lot of optical illusions show us that that necessarily is not the case. There is a very interesting optical illusion called the Troxler fading. Troxler fading. If you search that Troxler fading on the internet, you will see different different types of images where there is a central dot where you look and fix your gaze, and there is a drawing of some object around it with a little faded coloring in effect. The image that I am seeing here, and I might also put it on the video, is of a cat with a very scary cat with a with a dot with a cross in the center. And if you keep focusing on the cross, slowly the colors of the cat will fade away, with the teeth fading at the last moment. This is I'll put this image itself so that you know what I'm talking about. This is Troxler fading. Why is Troxler fading at odds with this understanding of perception being the hypotheses testing of the mind? Well, if you keep fixating on one point, the sensory input by definition is not changing. The sensory input is unchanged. The retina has the same image being projected on it all throughout. However, the perception changes. The perception of the image changes from the whole image into just an absence of any image and color. But as soon as you move your eyes away, all of a sudden, all those colors in an instant come back. Right? How strange is that? Perception is fooling us. Why is that happening? And I think this paper is about all that, about that understanding and how to understand that. But also it is suggesting that if we just take into account the fact that action, in this case action is the changing of the movement of eyes is the action. The movement of eyes is itself something that is a part of the hypotheses testing. So not just perception, but action is also a part of this whole model. Brain creates actions so as to understand the world outside. All right, and this is what active inference is, basically. That is what the theory suggests, that action is also inferred. There is some inference related to action, not just perception. There is another example of an experiment, binocular rivalry. What is it? Well, people figured out a way to test different things about the perception, different testing methodologies regarding perception by having those VR goggles where each eye has a different screen and a different image, and showing a different image to both eyes to the patient and asking them questions based on that. Right now, what happens is if you do that on yourself, you'll realize that both images don't get combined into one image. If you're seeing a car in the left eye and seeing a house in the right eye, it doesn't combine the two images into the jumbled mess of color and shadows. What happens is you see one image and all of a sudden randomly it switches to another image, to the second image, and then again shifts to the first image. I think it's randomly. Maybe some people can control it, but a lot of people cannot. And that is called binocular rivalry. There's a rivalry between two different inputs, and the brain decides to select one or the other. Now, how is it relevant? The exact same thing is happening. You are not changing. You're not acting on anything. You're not acting on the world. The each eye is facing the same stimulus, is facing the same sensory input, but the perception changes. The perception changes randomly. Same with troxels are fading. You are not changing the sensory input, but the perception is changing. So these two experiments are connected in this way, and there is some talk about how action is also a part of the whole issue. And I'm really excited about this paper. It really tingles my fancy in interesting ways because, first of all, I'm finally getting to understand a lot of different things. And it's becoming a little easier to read papers because I've already read two papers in the last month, and this is the third one. And I realize that there is a way to just go with it, just not to be hung on one thing that you don't understand, and just go ahead and try to figure out and try to finish the whole thing, go through the experiment, go through the conclusion, go through the way they collect data and understand perception, understand all these results, and ultimately you will figure out a way to get something out of it, to understand something out of it. And this is fascinating. I love it. This paper is called Perceptual Awareness and Active Inference by Thomas Parr, Andrew W. Corcoran, Carl J. Friston, and Jacob Howie. They are from London and Monash, a university in Melbourne. I think, London and Melbourne are the two places where these writers are lying. And much excited. See you tomorrow with more understanding of consciousness.